My name is Caroline Bennett, and I am 29 years old. On a bright Saturday afternoon in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the heavy oak doors of the First Presbyterian Church swung inward. A wedge of golden light spilled down the center aisle, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. I stood frozen at the threshold, white lace catching on the rough stone floor. To my right, Ethan's family filled every available inch of polished wood. Their murmurs created a warm, steady hum of anticipation. They wore gentle smiles, leaning out into the aisle to catch a glimpse of the bride. Then, I looked to my left, row after row of empty mahogany. Crisp, unused ceremony programs sat perfectly aligned on the velvet cushions. No aunts, no uncles, no father waiting to take my arm, no mother fixing my veil, no older brother making jokes to cut the tension. Just an echoing, hollow void. A sharp vibration pulsed against my palm. My phone, tucked discreetly into the silk wrapping of my bouquet, lit up the dim vestibule. The screen displayed a single incoming text message from my mother, Diane. "His promotion party is more important. We will not be there." I said nothing. Then my 82-year-old Grandma Ruby stepped out of the shadows, grabbed my arm, and pressed a heavy, vintage brass key into my palm. "I kept my husband's ledger locked away for a reason," she whispered. "Thieves always leave a paper trail. They will regret this, and soon they will understand why." Before I tell you exactly what my family stole from me, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the Jessica Told Stories channel, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment letting me know your age, where you are watching from, and what time it is there. My knuckles turned bone white. The stems of my bouquet pressed hard into my skin. I had chosen Oklahoma Indian blankets, resilient, drought-hardy wildflowers, boasting fierce shades of crimson and gold. They thrived in harsh conditions. It was a deliberate aesthetic rebellion against the imported, fragile flora my family deemed mandatory for polite society. Right now, I needed their resilience. The whispers from Ethan's side of the church shifted, taking on a confused, sympathetic tone. They noticed the barren left section. Pity is a heavy thing to wear on your wedding day. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing to take the first humiliating step alone. I thought about the morning I had just endured. Waking up in a hotel room with only my best friend and my future mother-in-law to help me into my dress. Every time there was a knock at the door, my stomach had flipped, hoping against all logic that my parents had changed their minds. Hoping that for one single day in my 29 years of existence, I could be the priority. Instead, I received an empty aisle and a 7-word text message. My father, John, did not call to apologize. My brother, Tyler, did not reach out to say he wished things were different. They simply discarded my wedding day like an expired coupon, trading it for corporate handshakes and expensive champagne at a downtown aerospace logistics firm. At the end of the aisle stood Ethan. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his hands clasped in front of him. When he saw the empty pews on my side, his jaw tightened. His eyes found mine across the distance, holding a mixture of fierce, protective anger and unwavering love. He gave me a single, solid nod. He was my anchor in a room that felt like it was spinning out of control. A rustle of stiff taffeta broke the silence in the vestibule. Grandma Ruby bypassed the sympathetic glances, walking directly to my side. She did not offer a sad smile or a comforting pat on the shoulder. Instead, she reached out and grasped my arm with surprising strength. With her other hand, she pried my stiff fingers open and pressed that cold, heavy key into my palm. Her voice was a low, steady rasp that cut through the stifling church air. "I watched them gut you for years, Caroline," she said. I watched them take your light and give it to a boy who does not know how to shine on his own. Stand up straight. You are a Bennett, and today you are walking toward a man who actually deserves you. I curled my fingers around the jagged edges of the brass key. It dug into my skin, grounding me. The organist struck the first chord of the processional. The deep, resonant notes vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up my spine. Grandma Ruby linked her arm through mine. We stepped out of the shadows and into the golden light. Every eye in the room was on us. I kept my chin high. I focused solely on Ethan, ignoring the gaping hole on my left. I listened to the rhythmic click of my heels against the stone. With every step, a lifetime of desperate childhood yearning began to flake away, replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. They did not just miss a party. They severed the final thread. As Ethan took my hands at the altar, his thumbs brushed over my trembling knuckles. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I leaned into his warmth, the brass key still hidden securely in the folds of my dress. The ceremony was a blur of vows and rings and soft laughter from Ethan's family, but beneath the joy, a quiet, calculating storm was brewing inside my chest. Grandma Ruby's words echoed in my mind. Thieves always leave a paper trail. I was a data analyst. My entire career was built on finding anomalies in subterranean pressure systems, analyzing complex numbers to predict when the Earth was about to shift. If my parents had stolen something, if they had built Tyler's gilded life on a foundation of hidden ledgers and fraudulent numbers, I was exactly the person equipped to tear it down. To understand the gravity of that brass key and the true scale of the heist my own blood had pulled off, we have to step out of this church. We have to rewind 2 years. Back to a time when the theft was just beginning, hiding in plain sight under the guise of family loyalty. Back to when the rolling hills of Oklahoma were producing record-breaking natural gas, and my family was busy crafting the perfect corporate illusion for their golden boy. Tulsa is a city built on the invisible forces of pressure and extraction. The rhythmic thud of the pump jacks stretches across the sprawling plains, serving as a constant reminder of the deep, subterranean shifts happening right beneath our feet. I understood pressure better than most. As a petroleum data analyst, my entire career consisted of staring at complex numerical models, predicting the exact moment the Earth could no longer hold the weight above it. I spent my days searching for fractures in the bedrock. I should have applied that same rigorous logic to my own family. I should have seen the fault lines cracking long before they chose to skip my wedding day. But when you are raised in the shadow of a golden child, your vision gets blurred by a desperate, pathetic need for approval. Tyler was 3 years older than me. He was blessed with my mother's effortless charm and a smile that could talk a prairie rattlesnake out of its venom. He was the sun, and I was just the dense, silent rock orbiting him, expected to absorb the heat and remain firmly in the background. The theft of my identity and my labor did not start with corporate sabotage. It started small, conditioning me to accept my role as the supporting character in his life. When I was 12 years old, I spent 6 agonizing months compiling crop yield statistics for a state agricultural data competition. I sat at our sticky kitchen table every single night, running tedious calculations on graphing paper until my fingers were bruised and stained with graphite. Tyler, meanwhile, was 15, and spending his evenings sneaking out of his bedroom window to drink cheap beer behind the high school bleachers. I won the grand prize. It was a heavy, beautiful satin blue ribbon with the state seal pressed in bright gold leaf. I remember standing on the gymnasium stage, the smell of floor wax and nervous sweat thick in the air, searching the crowded bleachers for my parents. When I finally climbed down the wooden stairs, clutching the ribbon to my chest, My father, John, intercepted me. He did not hug me. Instead, he threw his thick arm around Tyler's shoulder, looked at the cluster of other parents standing nearby, and beamed with pride. "We are so proud of Tyler," my dad announced loudly, his voice echoing in the gym. "He spent hours helping his little sister with the math. He has a real brilliant mind for numbers." Tyler did not correct him. He did not say that he had never even looked at my spreadsheets. He just offered a modest, charming shrug and soaked in the applause that belonged to me. My mother, Diane, stood next to them, smiling in silent agreement. I stood there holding my ribbon, the rough satin scratching against my palms, learning a very specific, devastating lesson. My labor was simply raw material for Tyler's success. That pattern hardened into unbreakable concrete as we reached adulthood. I clawed my way through a rigorous engineering and analytics degree, securing a highly demanding position at a top energy firm in the city. I worked 60-hour weeks, living in a practical, unadorned, one-bedroom apartment building, a bulletproof professional reputation from the ground up. Tyler dropped out of 2 different business programs before barely scraping by with a communications degree. Yet the family narrative never shifted. John and Diane constantly assured our relatives that Tyler was just finding his footing, waiting for the right opportunity to showcase his genius. When Tyler finally needed a real career to fund his increasingly expensive tastes, my parents turned their sights directly on me. John called me on a Tuesday evening, his tone laced with that familiar, heavy expectation. "Your brother needs a foot in the door, Caroline. You work with those senior executives at the aerospace logistics firm. Make a call. Put in a good word." I gripped my phone, staring out my apartment window at the distant city lights. I tried to explain that aerospace logistics required meticulous precision, strict compliance, and severe analytical skills, not just a firm handshake and a golf handicap. My father cut me off immediately, his voice turning cold and sharp. "Family opens doors for family," he insisted. "You have the contacts, Caroline. Do not be selfish." So I compromised my own hard-earned professional capital. I made the introduction. I put my name on the line. Tyler walked into an interview, armed with my glowing endorsement, and walked out with a lucrative junior executive position he had zero business holding. He could barely read a basic profit and loss statement, but he looked fantastic in a tailored suit, and he knew how to flatter the right people. The injustice of this dynamic was not just emotional. It was systemic, and it was deeply financial. One rainy Thursday evening, I sat at my small kitchen island. The sounds of an Oklahoma thunderstorm rattled the glass window panes. I had my laptop open, staring at my bank statements under the harsh overhead light. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I created a secure digital folder on my desktop and named it Rent Loans. Over the past 12 months, John and Diane had routinely called me with fabricated emergencies: a broken water heater, a sudden unexpected medical bill, a sharp increase in property taxes. I transferred the funds to them without question because that is what a dutiful daughter does. But I knew exactly where the money was really going. It went directly into funding Tyler's luxury downtown loft. His junior executive salary could not sustain his extravagant lifestyle, the expensive dinners, the designer clothes. My parents were quietly subsidizing his rent and his image, using my paycheck. I organized the spreadsheets, watching the numbers climb into the thousands. I told myself it was fine. I justified the severe drain on my own savings because the alternative was too painful to admit. The alternative was accepting that my parents viewed me merely as a bank account to keep their golden boy afloat. Then Ethan came along and fundamentally changed the equation. Ethan was a geophysicist. We met on a dusty, deafening drilling site just outside of the city limits. He saw me in a hard hat covered in fine red dirt, firmly arguing with a site manager about pressure variances, and he asked me to dinner. Ethan did not look past me. He looked right at me. For the first time in my entire life, I was someone's first choice. After a year of quiet, steady, unwavering love, he took me to the Wichita Mountains. As the sun dipped below the sweeping prairie grass, he got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. The ring was perfect. A delicate, vintage cut that caught the fading light and sparkled with promise. I was overflowing with a bright, dizzying joy I had never experienced before. We drove straight back to my parents' house to share the news, hoping that this one milestone would finally earn their genuine happiness. John and Diane were sitting in their pristine, sterile living room. I walked in, holding Ethan's hand tightly, and extended my left arm. "We are engaged," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. My mother looked at the ring. She did not gasp. She did not stand up to hug me. She offered a tight, polite smile that barely reached her eyes. "Oh, that is nice, Caroline," she murmured, her tone flat. Before another word could be spoken, the front door swung open, and Tyler walked in, jingling a heavy set of keys. "You will never believe the interest rate I scored," Tyler announced to the room. Diane immediately stood up, brushing right past me and Ethan without a second glance. John clapped his thick hands together, his face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "You got the sports car," my dad cheered. For the next 2 hours, Ethan and I sat in their living room while they discussed leather seats, horsepower, and Tyler's brilliant negotiation skills. Nobody asked Ethan how he proposed. Nobody asked to see my engagement ring again. We sat on the edge of the sofa, entirely invisible. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand, his jaw clenched tight. He saw the rot. He saw the profound sickness of the dynamic. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat, forcing a smile, telling myself that it was just one night. But the quiet sting of that dismissal was merely the opening act. Because planning a wedding requires attention, time, and resources. And in the Bennett household, attention was a finite resource, reserved exclusively for my brother. The subtle slights were about to evolve into deliberate, calculated sabotage, threatening to strip away the one beautiful thing I had tried to build for myself, pushing me closer to a devastating financial edge. Planning a wedding should be a season of joy, a time when a mother and daughter bond over fabric swatches and cake tastings. Ethan and I decided to keep our celebration intimate and authentic to who we were. We spent our weekends driving across the sweeping Oklahoma plains, searching for a location that felt right. We finally found it, an hour outside the city limits. The Whispering Pines estate was a restored 19th century barn sitting atop a gentle hill. It featured soaring vaulted ceilings made of weathered oak beams, wrought iron chandeliers that cast a warm amber glow, and massive sliding doors that opened directly onto a breathtaking view of the rolling prairie. It was rustic, elegant, and entirely perfect. I signed the contract and wired the deposit that same afternoon. Handing over that money felt like claiming a tangible piece of my own future. I was finally building something beautiful that belonged exclusively to me and Ethan. The following Tuesday, I invited my mother over for coffee. I foolishly expected a standard afternoon of bridal excitement. I brewed her favorite dark roast, cleared my small kitchen island, and opened my laptop to show her the gallery of venue photos. I pointed out the sprawling wooden dance floor and the fields of tall grass where we would take our portraits. Diane did not smile. She did not express a single ounce of joy. She took a slow sip of her coffee, set the mug down, and pulled her own tablet out of her designer handbag. "I started a vision board for the upcoming season," she announced, her tone brisk and businesslike. I leaned over to look at her screen. There were no lace dresses, no floral arrangements, no pastel color palettes. Her digital board was filled with sleek chrome high-top tables, customized corporate banners, and stark black and white centerpieces. It was a mood board for an executive business summit. Diane scrolled back to my photos of the historic barn and tapped her perfectly manicured nail against my laptop screen. "This space is far too nice for just a wedding," she declared. "Tyler has been looking for an off-site location to host his third-quarter aerospace networking gala. He needs to impress the senior partners at his new firm. This barn has the exact corporate retreat aesthetic his executives love. You need to call the owners and transfer your reservation date to him." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. I waited for her to laugh and say she was joking. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. She was entirely serious. My mother was sitting in my kitchen, demanding I surrender the deposit for my wedding day so my brother could throw a glorified office party. "I cannot do that," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden pounding in my chest. "This is my wedding venue. We already locked in the date." Diane narrowed her eyes, snapping her tablet shut. "Do not be difficult, Caroline. Tyler needs this gala to solidify his standing as a junior executive. You can get married in the church basement or the local community center. You do not need a grand estate. Your brother's career is at stake." I refused. I told her the barn was mine and the date was final. Diane stood up, grabbed her handbag, and walked out of my apartment without another word. The retaliation was swift and punishing. My father called the very next morning. His deep, resonant voice poured through the speaker, heavy with manufactured disappointment. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the man who was supposed to protect me tear down my character. "Your mother told me how selfish you were being," John said. "Tyler is trying to build a network that funds the family legacy. He is operating at a high corporate level, and you are standing in his way. Over a party. A wedding is just one day, Caroline. Tyler's career sets the foundation for all of us. You need to call that venue and hand over the contract." I felt the old, familiar urge to shrink. My entire life had been a masterclass in folding myself into smaller pieces so Tyler could take up more room. The conditioning ran deep. My throat tightened, and the apology rested right on the tip of my tongue. I almost gave in. I almost handed over my joy to keep the peace. Then I looked down at the vintage-cut engagement ring resting on my left hand. I thought about Ethan. I thought about a man who looked at me and saw a partner, not a resource to be mined. I gripped the phone, took a slow breath, and said the hardest word I had ever spoken to my father. "No." I hung up. The fallout from that single syllable was relentless. Diane launched a text message campaign designed to break my spirit. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the workday. "You always ruin things for your brother. I hope your petty little day is worth destroying his future. You have always been so jealous of his success." Instead of crying, something inside me shifted. The hurt daughter stepped back, and the meticulous data analyst took over. I opened my laptop. I created a secure digital folder on my desktop and named it Receipts. I started taking screenshots of every single manipulative message, every guilt trip, every cruel accusation. I filed them away methodically. I did not know exactly why I was saving them yet, but my instincts, honed by years of studying behavioral anomalies, told me I would need proof of their character. Then came the final warning. Tyler called me late on a Sunday night. When I answered, his voice lacked its usual effortless golden boy charm. It was thin, reedy, and tight with an undercurrent of genuine panic. He did not ask for a favor. He threatened me. "You do not understand what is at stake here," he hissed through the receiver. "You are making things very difficult for everyone, Caroline. I need that venue to secure investor confidence. If I look bad to these executives, we all look bad. Fix this." The desperation in his tone was chilling. He did not sound like a successful aerospace executive planning a triumphant networking event. He sounded like a man standing on the edge of a sheer cliff, desperately trying to distract his bosses from noticing the ground crumbling beneath his feet. I realized Tyler was relying heavily on expensive appearances to cover up something deeply flawed at his firm. By refusing to surrender my upscale venue, I had inadvertently threatened his fragile house of cards. I told him the venue was mine, and I ended the call. I kept my location, but drawing that boundary came at a steep price. My family realized their usual emotional manipulation was no longer working on me. I had finally grown a spine, which meant they needed a new strategy to force my compliance. The emotional warfare was about to pivot into a calculated strike on my bank account. They were preparing to leverage my own wedding against me, and I was entirely unprepared for the devastating financial bill that was about to come due. My parents never viewed money as a simple tool to purchase goods or services. In the Bennett household, currency functioned as a spotlight, a weapon, and a heavy chain. After I refused to surrender the rustic barn venue to my brother, an uneasy truce settled over the family. My mother and father abruptly shifted their tactics. If they could not steal the location, they would hijack the guest experience to elevate their own social standing among the Tulsa elite. Ethan and I had budgeted for a modest, authentic reception dinner. We envisioned the beloved local barbecue vendor featuring slow-smoked brisket and sweet tea served casually under the vaulted oak beams. It fit our personalities perfectly. My parents vetoed the idea the moment they heard it. John scoffed, adjusting his expensive golf watch, declaring that no daughter of his would serve paper plates to his business associates. He insisted on hiring the most exclusive steakhouse in the city limits. They promised to cover the entire cost, presenting the offer as a generous olive branch. I wanted to maintain a sliver of familial harmony, so I yielded. We signed a contract for prime rib, imported wines, and plated table service. The total came to $12,000. At the tasting, my father slid his check across the pristine white linen tablecloth with a practiced theatrical flourish, making sure the catering manager noticed his grand gesture. A month before the wedding date, the illusion cracked. I was sitting at my desk analyzing a complex set of subterranean basin logs when my cell phone vibrated. The caller ID flashed the name of the steakhouse. I answered, expecting a routine question about seating arrangements or dietary restrictions. Instead, the catering manager's voice carried a tight, strained edge. "Caroline, I am so sorry to bother you at work. We have a serious problem. The bank just returned the final payment. The check your father wrote bounced due to insufficient funds. If we do not receive a valid wire transfer by Friday, we have to cancel your event." The air vanished from my lungs. A hot, prickling wave of humiliation washed over my neck and cheeks. I stared at the geological data on my dual monitors, the colorful stratigraphs blurring together. My parents lived in a pristine suburban subdivision. They drove pristine imported cars. They belonged to pristine country clubs. Checks bearing the Bennett name did not bounce. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat, apologizing profusely to the vendor, promising to resolve the deficit within 24 hours. I stepped into the quiet corporate hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. My fingers felt numb as I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring, the bright, artificial cheer in her tone setting my teeth on edge. "The caterer just called," I said, keeping my volume low, trying to contain the tremor in my voice. "The $12,000 check Dad wrote was returned. There are no funds in that account." Diane did not gasp. She did not offer a frantic apology or claim there was a banking error. A long, casual sigh echoed through the receiver. "Oh, right," she murmured, sounding as if she had merely forgotten to pick up dry cleaning. Tyler had an emergency this morning. His firm moved his promotion evaluation up by a week. He needed a bespoke Italian suit and new leather Oxfords for the executive portraits. We had to reroute that money to his account so he could pay the tailor. He cannot walk into a senior vice president meeting looking off-the-rack Caroline. I pressed my forehead against the cool, painted cinder block wall of the hallway. You took the money for my wedding food to buy Tyler clothes. It is just dinner, she retorted, her voice hardening, annoyed by my lack of understanding. You and Ethan can figure something out. Your brother's corporate image is an investment. We will pay you back, eventually. But right now, you need to handle your own party. The line went dead. That evening, I sat alone at my small kitchen island. Outside, a gentle wind rustled the tall prairie grass, but inside, the silence felt heavy and suffocating. A mug of dark roast coffee sat untouched next to my laptop, slowly turning cold. I pulled up my personal banking dashboard. My savings were already depleted from the dress, the flowers, and the venue deposit. Staring at the glaring $12,000 deficit, the math was brutal and unforgiving. There was no magical safety net. If I wanted to feed my guests and save the reception, I had to generate the cash myself. I logged into my company portal and submitted a request to take on double shifts. For the next 4 weeks, I would spend my days doing my regular job and my nights analyzing secondary pressure mapping reports for a rival drilling site. I would trade sleep sanity and wedding anticipation for spreadsheets and raw data to clean up my parents' financial mess. I drove to the bank the next morning, withdrew the necessary funds from my newly depleted accounts, and delivered a cashier's check directly to the catering manager. While I stood in the steakhouse lobby, the manager handed me a voided copy of my father's return check for my records. I walked back to my car, sat behind the steering wheel, and stared at the rectangular slip of paper. In the past, I would have ripped it up, eager to bury the shame of my family's betrayal. I would have made excuses for them. But the hurt daughter was gone. The data analyst remained. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I carefully flattened the returned check against my steering wheel. I snapped a high-resolution photo capturing every single digit, the routing code, the account number, the printed address. I uploaded the image directly into the encrypted folder on my desktop named Receipts. Have you ever had to buy your own peace of mind? Have you ever realized that the price of freedom is simply paying the toll yourself, so no one can ever hold it over your head again? Sitting in that quiet parking lot, a profound, icy calm settled over my chest. The frantic anxiety that had plagued me for months evaporated. I saw the Bennett family dynamic for what it truly was. They were not just emotionally negligent. They were siphoning my resources, leveraging my life to construct a hollow pedestal for my brother. I stopped asking for their input. I stopped hoping for their approval. I locked my heart behind a steel door, turning methodical, precise, and detached. I was ready to walk down the aisle on my own terms. But my family was not finished extracting their toll. Because just as I secured the caterer and braced for a peaceful wedding, Tyler's aerospace firm threw a wrench into the calendar, forcing a collision that would push my parents to make their ultimate, unforgivable choice. I survived the double shifts. I paid the caterer. The invitations were already sealed, stamped, and delivered. 14 months of meticulous planning had culminated in a delicate house of cards that I protected with my own exhaustion. 3 weeks remained until the ceremony. I mistakenly believed the worst was behind me. I thought my family had extracted every possible ounce of leverage they could find. I forgot that in the economy of their affection, Tyler's needs were an endless void. The summons came on a Tuesday evening. My mother sent a brief text requiring my presence at their house for an urgent family meeting. She did not mention Ethan. She did not ask if I was busy. It was a directive. I drove to their upscale subdivision, navigating the perfectly manicured cul-de-sacs as a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The Oklahoma heat radiated off the asphalt, but stepping into their foyer felt like walking into a refrigerated vault. I found John and Diane sitting in the formal living room. The space resembled a showroom more than a home. White leather sofas, glass coffee tables, and a glaring absence of family photos that did not feature my brother. They were relaxed. My father leaned back in his armchair, swirling a generous pour of aged scotch in a heavy crystal tumbler. My mother sat opposite him, holding a matching glass, the amber liquid catching the recessed lighting. The ice clinked against the crystal, a sharp, cheerful sound that felt entirely out of place given the tension humming in the air. "Sit down, Caroline," my father instructed, gesturing to the empty love seat with his drink. "We have a scheduling issue to discuss." I remained standing, gripping the strap of my purse. What kind of scheduling issue? My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her scotch. Tyler received incredible news today. The aerospace firm finalized the date for his senior vice president promotion gala. The executive board is flying in from Chicago. It is a monumental step for his career. We are so proud. I waited. The silence stretched. The ice clinked again. "The board scheduled the gala for the third Saturday of next month," my father stated, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. My lungs seized. The third Saturday. My wedding date. The date engraved on the invitations currently sitting on their kitchen counter. The date I had secured 14 months ago. The date I had just worked night shifts to save. "That is my wedding day," I said, my voice barely a whisper. My mother waved her manicured hand, dismissing my panic with a breezy flick of her wrist. "We know," she said. "That is why we called you over. You need to contact your vendors tomorrow morning and push the ceremony back to the fall. October is beautiful for a prairie wedding." I stared at them. They were not joking. They were sitting in their pristine living room, casually drinking expensive liquor, treating the destruction of my wedding day like an administrative inconvenience. They expected me to call Ethan, call the venue, cancel the catering I had just bled to pay for, and dismantle the most important day of my life so they could attend a corporate mixer. "I cannot change the date," I said, my voice gaining strength. "The contracts are locked. The guests have booked their flights. I am getting married in 3 weeks. Tyler will just have to celebrate without you, or you will have to miss his party." My father slammed his crystal tumbler down on the glass coffee table. The sharp crack echoed through the sterile room. "Do not be unreasonable," he snapped, his face flushing with sudden heat. "Your brother is stepping into a senior vice president role. This is a once-in-a-lifetime achievement. It requires our presence. We have to host the executives. We have to secure his standing." "And my wedding?" I asked, the sting of tears threatening my vision. "What is my wedding?" My mother sighed, the sound dripping with patronizing exhaustion. "A wedding is just a party, Caroline. People reschedule events all the time. Tyler is building a legacy. You are being rigid and selfish over a single evening. You can wear a white dress any day of the year, but he only gets inducted into the senior partnership once." The sheer audacity of the comparison struck me like a physical blow. A party. The day I promised my life to a man who truly loved me was just a disposable party. Tyler's fragile corporate facade built on my introductions and funded by stolen catering money was their priority. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who carried me, who taught me how to tie my shoes, who was supposed to stand beside me while I put on my veil. Her eyes held no warmth. There was no internal conflict. She was not agonizing over a tragic coincidence. She was irritated that I was not cooperating. "I will not change my date," I stated. The words felt heavy, carved from stone. "I am getting married on the third Saturday. If you choose his gala over my wedding, you are making a choice I will never let you undo." My father stood up, towering over the coffee table. "Is that an ultimatum?" he demanded. "Are you threatening us?" "It is a boundary," I replied, refusing to break eye contact. "Fine," my mother clipped her voice, turning to ice. "If you insist on being stubborn, then you leave us no alternative. Consider our RSVPs withdrawn. We will be at the aerospace gala, supporting the child who actually understands family loyalty. Do not expect us at the church." The air left the room. They said it. They actually said the words. They were abandoning me. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply turned around and walked out the front door. I left them sitting in their perfect, sterile house with their aged scotch and their golden boy. I got into my car and drove. I did not head back to my apartment. I drove away from the subdivisions, away from the concrete highways, out toward the edge of the city where the neon lights faded into the deep, sweeping dark of the Oklahoma plains. I pulled onto a gravel shoulder overlooking an empty expanse of prairie grass. The wind howled against the windows, a lonely, restless sound. I put the car in park, gripped the steering wheel, and shattered. I cried until my ribs ached. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. I grieved the parents I was supposed to have. I mourned the mother who should have been excited to see my dress. I wept for the father who should have been practicing his toast. I sat in the dark and let the agonizing realization hollow me out. I was an orphan with living parents. When there were no tears left, a profound stillness settled over me. The dashboard clock glowed green in the dark. It was nearly midnight. I reached for my phone resting on the passenger seat. My hands were finally steady. I opened my messages and scrolled down to Grandma Ruby's contact. She was the only person in the Bennett bloodline who saw the rot for what it was. I typed 5 words, hit send, and watched the status change to delivered. It is just us now. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. The desperation to earn their love was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical armor. I was ready to walk down the aisle without them. But my parents were not content to simply disappear. If they were going to skip my wedding, they needed a compelling narrative to justify their absence to the rest of the world. They needed a villain. And they decided I was going to play the part. When you decide to draw a firm boundary with toxic people, the silence that follows is rarely peaceful. People who build their entire identities on a pristine public image cannot afford to look like the villains in their own story. If my parents were going to skip their only daughter's wedding to attend a corporate networking mixer, they needed a compelling narrative to feed the extended family. They needed a scapegoat. I had 29 years of experience playing that exact role, and they assumed I would quietly accept the blame once again. The smear campaign began less than 48 hours after I walked out of their pristine living room. My mother, Diane, did not use social media to launch her attack. She operated with the lethal precision of a seasoned politician, utilizing the traditional network of Tulsa high society gossip. She sat in her pristine kitchen and started making phone calls. She called Aunt Patricia in Dallas. She called Uncle Lawrence in Denver. She called my cousins who still lived scattered across the Great Plains. Diane spun a masterful and devastating lie. She told them that Tyler had scheduled his aerospace promotion gala months in advance. She claimed that I, consumed by a lifelong bitter jealousy of my brother's success, had intentionally moved my wedding date to the exact same Saturday just to force the family to choose. She painted me as a vindictive and unstable daughter trying to ruin her sibling's big career milestone out of pure spite. It was a brilliant inversion of reality. The lie was so bold, so meticulously delivered with my mother's signature manufactured tears, that the extended family swallowed it without a second thought. The fallout was immediate and deeply isolating. Every afternoon, I walked down the concrete sidewalk to my mailbox, hoping to find the heavy cream cardstock envelopes bearing joyful responses from my relatives. Instead, I opened a steady stream of rejections. The little boxes next to "regretfully declines" were checked in sharp black ink. Some relatives did not even bother returning the formal RSVP cards. They simply sent terse text messages that made my stomach drop. "I cannot believe you would do this to your brother," one aunt wrote. "We will be attending the gala in the city. You need to grow up, Caroline." I sat at my kitchen island, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. The rejection stung, a dull, throbbing ache radiating through my chest. The true depth of their cruelty arrived a few days later, delivered through an unexpected channel. Grandma Ruby sent me an image file. It was a screenshot of an extensive family group chat. My parents had excluded me from this particular thread years ago, but Ruby maintained her quiet presence, watching the dysfunction unfold from the sidelines. In the chat, a cousin asked if anyone was still planning to attend the wedding ceremony before heading to the aerospace gala. Tyler replied immediately. "Let the bridezilla have her empty room," he typed. "She has been trying to ruin my big night since I got the promotion. It is pathetic." Below his message, a cascade of laughing emojis filled the screen. Aunts, uncles, and cousins reacting to my isolation with digital amusement. They were mocking the destruction of my wedding day, rallying around the golden boy while I bled out in silence. I looked at the screenshot for a long time. In the past, this level of targeted cruelty would have broken my spirit. I would have drafted a dozen frantic, desperate replies begging them to believe the truth. I would have sent copies of my original venue contract proving I had booked the date 14 months prior. Explaining the truth to people committed to misunderstanding you is a futile endeavor. I did not cry. My vision sharpened. The deep, agonizing grief morphed into a cold, protective shield. I saved the screenshot. I dragged the image file into the secure folder on my desktop named Receipts. It joined the bounced catering check, the manipulative texts, and the financial spreadsheets proving their corporate theft. The folder was no longer just a collection of hurts. It was a loaded weapon, waiting for the precise moment to be fired. The stark contrast between my authentic reality and their hollow facade manifested in the very details of our respective events. Tyler and Diane were obsessed with projecting a flawless image of generational wealth. For his gala, my mother special-ordered imported white orchids from a boutique floral broker. They were delicate, expensive, and entirely unsuited for the harsh Oklahoma heat. Within hours of arriving at the downtown venue, those fragile petals would begin to brown and curl, wilting under the oppressive humidity. I finalized my order with a local grower. I chose Oklahoma Indian blankets. They were wildflowers born from the sweeping prairies, featuring fierce, vibrant shades of crimson and gold. They required no special climate control. They thrived in severe droughts and bloomed brilliantly under heavy pressure. They represented the exact kind of resilience I needed to cultivate. While my biological relatives spent their energy tearing me down, my chosen family stepped forward to fill the void. Ethan's parents lived 3 hours away, but they drove into Tulsa a week early to help us prepare. His mother walked into my small apartment carrying a tray of home-cooked enchiladas and wrapped her arms around me. She did not ask invasive questions. She did not offer hollow platitudes. She simply held me tight and told me that she was proud to gain a daughter. Ethan's father spent the afternoon fixing a leaky faucet in my kitchen and reviewing our honeymoon itinerary. his eyes crinkling with genuine excitement for our future. They showed me what unconditional support actually looked like. Love was not a transactional commodity in their household. It was a steady, reliable foundation. Their presence anchored my sanity during a week designed to make me feel entirely worthless. The days blurred together, moving with an inevitable rushing momentum. Suddenly, the waiting was over. I woke up on the morning of my wedding before the sun crusted over the rolling hills. The hotel suite was quiet, bathed in the soft blue light of dawn. I lay in the center of the large bed, listening to the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Today was the day. The day I would walk away from the Bennett name and everything it represented. My best friend and my future mother-in-law arrived with coffee pastries and a quiet, fierce, protective energy. They helped me wash my face, style my hair, and step into my dress. The gown was simple, structured, and elegant, a heavy silk crepe that fell gracefully to the floor, featuring long sleeves of intricate French lace. As they fastened the delicate pearl buttons running down my spine, I felt the fabric settle against my skin. It did not feel like a traditional bridal gown. It felt like finely woven armor. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer the frightened, desperate girl seeking scraps of affection from a family that viewed her as a utility. She was a data analyst who held the keys to their destruction. She was a bride stepping into a life she built with her own 2 hands. We drove to the First Presbyterian Church in near silence. The sprawling city of Tulsa passed by the tinted windows of the town car. The pump jacks nodded in the distance, working the subterranean layers, pulling value from the deep earth. I held my bouquet of crimson and gold wildflowers, the rough stems grounding me in the present moment. The car pulled up to the curb. I stepped out onto the sun-baked pavement. The heavy oak doors of the church loomed ahead, intricate carvings casting long shadows in the afternoon light. My best friend squeezed my hand once before slipping inside to take her seat. I stood alone in the cool, dim vestibule. The muffled sounds of guests settling into the wooden pews drifted through the thick doors. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing my heart for the visual impact of their betrayal. The usher pushed the heavy oak doors open. The wedge of golden light spilled down the center aisle, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the still air. I stood frozen at the threshold, my white lace catching on the rough stone floor. I looked to my right, seeing the packed pews filled with Ethan's loving family. Then I looked to my left, row after row of empty mahogany, an echoing, hollow void where my family should have been. A sharp vibration pulsed against my palm, the text message from my mother glowing on the screen. His promotion party is more important. We will not be there. Grandma Ruby stepped out of the shadows, her posture rigid, her eyes burning with a fierce, ancient knowing. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight and uncompromising. She pressed the cold, heavy, vintage brass key into my palm. "Thieves always leave a paper trail," she whispered, her voice slicing through the stifling church air. "They will regret this, and soon they will understand why." We stepped forward into the light. The first chord of the acoustic guitar resonated through the vaulted ceiling of the historic chapel. I took my first step. The air inside the sanctuary felt thick, heavy with the unsaid thoughts of the guests sitting to my right. I could feel their eyes darting toward the barren rows of mahogany on my left. A profound, agonizing, hollow space existed where my parents should have been sitting, where my brother should have been standing. Grandma Ruby did not let me falter. Her grip on my arm was a vice of unwavering support. "Keep your chin parallel to the floor, Caroline," she murmured, her voice a low, steady rasp. "You are not walking toward a funeral. You are walking toward your freedom." I focused my vision straight ahead. I forced my shoulders back, letting the heavy silk crepe of my gown trail over the rough stone floor. I stopped looking at the empty pews. I stopped mourning the ghost of a family that never truly existed. Instead, I looked at the man waiting for me at the end of the aisle. Ethan stood beneath a soaring archway of reclaimed oak. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the vintage stained glass windows situated high above the altar. The light fractured into brilliant shards of sapphire and ruby, painting the wooden floorboards in vivid color. As I drew closer, I saw the raw, unfiltered emotion etched across his face. His jaw trembled. A single tear slipped down his cheek, catching the fractured light. He was not looking at the empty space on my left. He was only looking at me. The walk down that aisle transformed from a public humiliation into a triumphant act of defiance. With every inch I moved forward, the invisible chains of my childhood fell away. I was no longer the secondary character in Tyler's manufactured drama. I was the architect of my own life. We reached the altar. Grandma Ruby released my arm, gave Ethan a firm, approving nod, and took her seat in the front row, the only person occupying the Bennett side of the room. Ethan reached out and took both of my hands. His palms were warm, steady, and familiar. I squeezed his fingers, the vintage brass key Ruby had given me, pressing safely against my palm, hidden within the folds of my lace sleeve. The ceremony was a quiet, beautiful blur. The officiant spoke words of partnership, endurance, and mutual respect. When we exchanged our vows, my voice did not shake. I promised to build a foundation of honesty with him. I promised to never treat his love as a transactional resource. When he leaned in to kiss me, the entire right side of the chapel erupted in genuine, joyous applause. The reception took place in the sprawling restored barn on the estate property. It was exactly the rustic, elegant vision Ethan and I had planned. The rich scent of slow-smoked brisket and roasted sweet corn drifted through the cool evening air. Wrought iron chandeliers cast a warm, amber glow over the wooden dance floor. For the first time in 29 years, I attended a family event where I did not have to monitor the emotional temperature of the room. I did not have to constantly assess whether my brother was receiving enough attention. I did not have to absorb my mother's passive-aggressive critiques or my father's heavy, dismissive sighs. The atmosphere was light, buoyant, and fiercely protective. Ethan's relatives embraced me, filling the space with loud laughter and authentic warmth. The absence of my abusers was not a tragedy. It was a profound, magnificent gift. Late in the evening, after the cake had been cut and the acoustic band shifted into a slow, rhythmic melody, I stepped away from the crowded dance floor. I needed a moment to catch my breath. I walked over to the sweetheart table and picked up my small clutch purse. The screen of my phone was dark, but a blinking indicator light caught my eye. I tapped the glass. A social media notification hovered on the lock screen. It was an alert from a mutual acquaintance tagging my mother in a new photo gallery. I swiped the notification open. The image loaded instantly, bright and glaring in the dim amber light of the barn. It was a high-resolution professional photograph taken at Tyler's Aerospace Networking Gala. My brother stood in the center of a lavish downtown ballroom, wearing the bespoke Italian suit my parents had purchased using my stolen catering funds. He was laughing, popping a bottle of expensive champagne, the foaming liquid spraying through the air. My father stood on his right, holding a crystal flute, beaming with unrestrained pride. My mother stood on his left, wearing a sleek designer gown, looking perfectly polished and pristine. Below the photograph, Diane had written a public caption. "Celebrating our only priority today. We are so incredibly proud of our senior vice president." The words were calculated, deliberate, and designed to inflict maximum pain. She knew I would see it. She wanted to ensure that even on my wedding day, I understood exactly where I ranked in the family hierarchy. Dead last. A year ago, that caption would have sent me spiraling into a dark, suffocating panic. I would have locked myself in a bathroom and cried until my makeup ran. I would have wondered what inherent flaw existed inside of me that made my own mother incapable of loving me. Standing by the sweetheart table, listening to the soft murmur of my new family laughing in the background, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I looked at Tyler's smug face. I looked at the expensive imported white orchids drooping in the background of their pristine corporate party. They were celebrating a hollow victory built entirely on a foundation of theft and deception. I pressed the side buttons on my phone and captured a screenshot of the image and the caption. I opened the encrypted application on my home screen and dragged the file directly into the folder marked Receipts. It nestled perfectly beside the bounced check and the abusive text messages. I did not type a bitter reply. I did not block her account in a fit of rage. I simply pressed the power button, holding it down until the screen went entirely black. I turned back toward the dance floor. Ethan was walking toward me, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. The amber light caught the gold band newly resting on his left hand. He smiled an easy, relaxed expression that made my chest ache with gratitude. Have you ever realized that holding on to toxic people is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die? Have you ever looked at the people who discarded you and felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of relief? Sometimes the trash takes itself out. You just have to be willing to let it go. I walked into my husband's arms, resting my head against his chest. We danced under the soaring oak beams while the Oklahoma wind swept across the dark prairie outside. I was a Bennett no longer. The scapegoat was dead. 6 months passed. The transition from the crisp autumn air of my wedding day to the heavy, humid heat of the following spring brought a relentless wave of professional success. I returned from our honeymoon and threw myself into my career with a laser-focused intensity. My firm, one of the premier energy data analytics companies in the region, recognized my drive. They promoted me to Senior Data Director. I moved into a corner office featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Tulsa skyline. I managed logistics, audited supply chains, and identified critical pressure points for major subterranean drilling contracts. My days were ruled by numbers, algorithms, and infallible hard data. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not play favorites. They simply reveal the truth to anyone willing to look closely enough. While I was building a solid, unimpeachable reputation, Tyler was drowning in the deep end of the corporate pool. His aerospace logistics firm was bleeding capital, and his executives were growing impatient with his charming excuses. He had spent his entire life relying on my intellect to carry him across the finish line. Now operating in a high-stakes environment without his sister to secretly correct his spreadsheets, his inherent incompetence was becoming impossible to hide. Then the unseen intersection occurred. A multi-million-dollar contract emerged that would force our 2 worlds to collide in the most spectacular, devastating way imaginable. Tyler's fragile house of cards was about to face a hurricane, and I was the meteorologist assigned to track the storm. Spring arrived in Tulsa with sweeping thunderstorms that washed the winter dust from the glass facades of the downtown skyscrapers. 6 months had passed since my wedding day. 6 months of silence from the people who raised me. The quiet was a fertile ground for my professional growth. My firm elevated me to Senior Data Director, recognizing the unrelenting focus I brought to every single project. My new office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the winding currents of the Arkansas River. My desk was a sanctuary of organized files, dual monitors, and infallible logic. I operated in a world where variables were defined and outcomes could be modeled. The corporate landscape of Oklahoma is a tightly woven fabric of energy producers and aerospace logistics. They rely on each other to transport heavy machinery, volatile materials, and high-stakes personnel. When a premier energy conglomerate announced a lucrative multi-year logistics contract, every major transportation firm in the region submitted a bid. The conglomerate, exercising standard due diligence, hired my analytics firm to conduct a rigorous third-party risk assessment on the top contenders. On a rainy Tuesday morning, a thick digital dossier landed in my secure inbox. I opened the file and read the cover page. The primary bidder was a prominent aerospace logistics company. The lead executive spearheading the proposal was Tyler Bennett, my brother. A cold chill crept up the back of my neck. I stared at his name typed in bold corporate font. He was presenting himself as a senior vice president, offering guarantees of operational efficiency and financial stability. My first instinct was pure professional preservation. I understood the severe ethical implications of auditing an immediate relative. I did not hesitate. I immediately downloaded the compliance forms, marched straight down the hall to the Human Resources Department, and formally declared a conflict of interest. I requested to be recused from the account, citing the direct familial relationship. In the corporate world, a declared conflict usually results in a swift reassignment. I returned to my desk, expecting the dossier to be transferred to another director by noon. 3 hours later, my department head walked into my office holding a printed waiver. He looked perplexed. He explained that the aerospace firm had been notified of the conflict as per standard legal protocol. Instead of requesting a neutral auditor, the lead executive on their end submitted a formal waiver legally overriding the conflict of interest. Tyler had specifically requested that I remain the lead analyst on his portfolio. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the leather squeaking softly in the quiet room. The sheer hubris was breathtaking. Tyler knew I was the auditor. He signed a legal document demanding I stay on the project because he still viewed me as the obedient, terrified little sister who used to do his math homework. He assumed I was still desperate for familial approval. He calculated that I would quietly rubber stamp his financial projections rather than risk causing another rift. He believed my spine was still made of wet paper. He handed me the knife, expecting me to hand it back handle first. I accepted the assignment. I closed my office door, drew the blinds, and opened his prospectus. Tyler had submitted hundreds of pages of logistical projections, supply chain cost analyses, and departmental budget histories. To a casual observer, the spreadsheets looked impressive. The formatting was sleek, the charts were colorful, and the summary paragraphs were filled with confident corporate jargon. But I was not a casual observer. I was a senior director, trained to spot structural weaknesses. I started pulling the raw numbers. Almost immediately, the surface-level gloss began to peel away. The traditional financial models were not catching the depth of the irregularities, so I decided to change my approach. A few months prior, Ethan had been working late at our kitchen table, designing a specialized geophysics modeling tool. His algorithm was built to locate hidden subterranean pressure drops. In oil drilling, companies sometimes lose thousands of gallons of expensive fluid into the earth. The fluid just vanishes. Ethan's tool mapped the velocity and volume of the input against the final output, identifying the exact hidden sinkholes where the resources were leaking into the surrounding bedrock. Cash flow in a corporate logistics department operates on the exact same principles of fluid dynamics. Money goes in, money travels through various operational channels, and money comes out. I exported Tyler's raw departmental data and ran the numbers through Ethan's pressure mapping algorithm. I adjusted the variables to represent capital instead of drilling mud. I pressed the execution key and watched the progress bar load across my screen. The resulting graph was a disaster of unprecedented proportions. Red warning indicators flooded my monitor. The algorithm highlighted severe, undeniable sinkholes in Tyler's departmental budget. Millions of dollars were entering his logistics division, but the operational output did not match the initial input. The capital was vanishing into phantom vendor accounts, inflated consulting fees, and unverified offshore shipping tariffs. The money was not just poorly managed, it was missing. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic pulse against my ribs. I cross-referenced the missing sums with the timeline of Tyler's lifestyle upgrades. The extravagant downtown loft, the custom-tailored Italian suits, the luxury sports car. The dates aligned with terrifying precision. Tyler was not a successful executive. He was a parasite. He was actively embezzling corporate funds to sustain the illusion of wealth, and he was using this new energy contract bid to secure a fresh injection of cash to cover his tracks before the annual audits caught him. If I approved his prospectus, I would be legally complicit in a federal crime. I did not invent the data. I did not alter a single digit to sabotage him. The numbers spoke for themselves, loud and uncompromising. I simply removed the sleek formatting and let the raw math tell the truth. I spent the next 2 days drafting the official risk assessment report. My language was clinical, objective, and devoid of any personal emotion. I documented the gaping financial sinkholes. I attached the algorithmic models proving the continuous loss of capital. I concluded the executive summary by formally flagging Tyler's department for severe operational risk and highly probable internal fraud. I recommended that the energy conglomerate terminate all negotiations immediately. I attached my digital signature, encrypted the file, and transmitted it to the chief executive officers of both the energy conglomerate and the aerospace logistics firm. I sat in my quiet office, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the Arkansas River. I felt a profound sense of peace. I had not sought revenge. I had merely performed my job with the utmost integrity. Tyler built a house out of stolen materials, and he arrogantly invited a building inspector to check the foundation. The fallout was instantaneous. Corporate structures do not tolerate internal theft. Within 24 hours, the energy conglomerate formally withdrew their multi-million-dollar bid, citing grave concerns over the aerospace firm's internal accounting. The sudden collapse of the deal triggered immediate panic alarms at the highest levels of Tyler's company. The senior partners demanded emergency audits. Tyler's coveted vice president position and his freedom were suddenly balancing on the edge of a very sharp blade. He was trapped. The paper trail Grandma Ruby warned me about had finally caught up to him, and a trapped animal always lashes out at the closest target. Tyler knew exactly who authored the report that ruined his scheme, and he knew he could not intimidate me on his own. He needed his traditional enforcers. He needed the two people who had spent their entire lives protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. The silence that had lasted since my wedding day was about to be broken by a desperate, toxic demand. The consequences of my risk assessment detonated through the Tulsa corporate sector faster than a spark in a dry subterranean gas pocket. When the energy conglomerate formally withdrew their lucrative bid, the executive board at Tyler's aerospace logistics firm demanded immediate answers. They summoned my brother into a closed-door meeting, placing his prospectus and my forensic audit directly in the center of a long mahogany table. They wanted to know why millions of dollars were unaccounted for and why an independent auditor had flagged his department for potential internal fraud. Facing termination and the looming threat of federal prosecution, Tyler panicked. He lacked the intellect to invent a plausible financial alibi, so he resorted to his oldest survival tactic. He hid behind our parents. I was standing in the living room of my new home on a quiet Thursday evening. The late spring sun cast long, warm shadows across the hardwood floor. Ethan was in the kitchen, humming a low tune while chopping vegetables for dinner. I held a small copper watering can, carefully tending to a large, vibrant monstera plant situated near the bay window. I ran my fingers over the broad green leaves, wiping away a thin layer of dust. My cell phone rested on the glass side table. The screen illuminated, accompanied by a sharp, buzzing vibration. I glanced at the caller ID. John Bennett. It was the first time my father had attempted to contact me, since he and my mother boycotted my wedding 6 months prior. Half a year of profound silence broken only now because their golden boy was standing on the edge of a corporate execution block. I set the copper watering can down. A year ago, seeing that name on my screen would have triggered a severe physiological reaction. My chest would have tightened, my palms would have sweat, and my mind would have scrambled to figure out what I had done wrong. Tonight, my pulse remained steady. The rhythmic sound of Ethan chopping vegetables in the next room grounded me in my actual reality. I picked up the device, tapped the green icon, and placed the call on speakerphone. I did not say hello. I just let the line open. "Caroline!" my father barked, his voice echoing tinny and harsh through the small speaker. "We need to talk about this report you filed against your brother." The audacity was staggering. There was no hesitation, no awkward throat clearing, no inquiries about my life, my health, or the wedding day they had abandoned. The very first words out of his mouth after 6 months of estrangement were a direct administrative demand. I leaned against the windowsill, crossing my arms over my chest. I listened to the subtle frequencies in his tone. My father was a man who used to silence entire dinner tables with a single heavy glare. He built his entire persona on projecting unwavering authority. But right now, hearing his voice compressed through the digital receiver, I detected a distinct tremor, a slight, frantic edge that he could not suppress. The foundation was cracking. "Tyler is facing a severe board review tomorrow afternoon," John continued, rushing his words. "He told his executives that you made a calculation error. He told them you held a petty personal grudge because of a scheduling conflict with your party last year, and you let your emotions cloud the data. You need to log into your firm's portal tonight and issue an official retraction." I looked down at the dark, nutrient-rich soil of my monstera plant. I had pruned the dead roots months ago, and the plant was thriving. "It is not a calculation error," I replied, my voice cool and measured. "The math is infallible. Your son is diverting corporate funds into phantom accounts to pay for his lifestyle. I tracked the capital loss using a pressure mapping algorithm. The money is gone." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. A muffled, frantic whisper indicated my mother was standing right next to him. "You are misinterpreting the numbers," John insisted, the tremor in his voice growing more pronounced. "Tyler just shifted some operational budgets to cover unexpected logistical tariffs. It is standard corporate maneuvering. You are going to ruin his career over a misunderstanding. You need to adjust the variables, rewrite the summary, and send a clean assessment to the aerospace CEO by tomorrow morning." I reached out and pinched a small yellowing leaf off a lower stem, dropping it into the trash bin. "What you are asking me to do is a federal felony," I stated calmly. "Altering a third-party corporate risk assessment to conceal internal embezzlement carries a mandatory prison sentence. I will not commit fraud to save Tyler from his own incompetence." The phone fumbled. I heard the rustle of fabric, and then my mother's voice pierced the connection. Diane did not attempt to use the booming authority my father preferred. She opted for venom. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little girl." Diane hissed her words, sharp and calculated. "Tyler's executives are meeting him at the country club tomorrow at 2 o'clock to finalize this review. If you do not provide an adjusted report clearing his name, we will make sure you never work in this city again." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued by the sheer delusion of her threat. Tulsa was a tight-knit corporate town, but my reputation was built on unyielding precision. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" I asked. "We will tell every energy executive in this state that you are an unstable, vindictive liar," Diane threatened her, breathing heavy into the microphone. "We will tell them you falsified federal documents just to punish your brother out of petty sibling jealousy. We will drag your name through the mud until your own firm fires you for gross ethical violations. You owe this family. You will fix this, or we will destroy you." I stood in the quiet warmth of my living room. The setting sun cast a golden hue over the walls. I held the power to hang up the phone, block their numbers, and let the federal auditors handle the rest. I owed them nothing, but my analytical mind saw the chessboard. I saw the unique convergence of variables. Tyler was cornered. His senior executives were flying in to interrogate him. My parents were leveraging their last remaining ounce of social capital to protect him. If I simply refused their demand over the phone, they would spend the next year whispering poison into the ears of every extended relative and country club acquaintance they possessed. They would forever play the victims of a cruel, jealous daughter. I needed to sever the narrative permanently. I needed them all in one room, on the record, trapped in a lie they could not escape. To spring a trap, you first have to offer the bait. I closed my eyes and mentally stepped back into the skin of the terrified 20-year-old girl I used to be. The girl who was desperate for her mother's approval. The girl who would fold herself into 1,000 tiny pieces just to keep the peace. I relaxed my throat, letting a sudden artificial waver enter my vocal cords. I took a short, ragged breath, simulating the onset of tears. "Please," I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly. "Please do not do that to my career. I worked so hard for this promotion." The shift in the atmosphere over the phone was instantaneous. I could practically hear my parents exhale in triumphant relief. They recognized this tone. This was the Caroline they knew, the weak, compliant scapegoat. "Just do what we are telling you to do," Diane said, her tone shifting from venomous to patronizing. "Fix the files. Be a good sister for once in your life." I sniffled, bringing my hand up to cover my mouth to muffle the fake sob. "Okay," I stammered, projecting pure defeat. "I do not want to ruin the family. I will stay up tonight and adjust the logistical variables. I can make the missing capital look like an acceptable depreciation error." Good John cut in, his booming confidence returning now that he believed he had regained control. "Print the revised assessment. Bring the hard copies to the private dining room at the Oak Ridge Country Club tomorrow at exactly 2 o'clock. You will hand the clean report directly to Tyler's executives. Apologize for your initial mathematical mistake, and then you will leave. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered, letting one final pathetic sigh escape my lips. "I will bring the files to the country club tomorrow. I am sorry." "See you tomorrow, Caroline," Diane said crisply. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. The manufactured tears vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, radiant clarity. My pulse was a slow, steady drumbeat. I looked at the dark screen of my device, a quiet smile forming on my lips. They believed they had won. They believed they had successfully bullied me into submission, and they were going to walk into that country club tomorrow feeling entirely invincible. They were completely unprepared for the devastating reality I was about to place on that mahogany table. Friday morning broke over the Oklahoma prairie with a sharp, brilliant clarity. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue, carrying the crisp promise of a reckoning. I woke up hours before my alarm, my mind operating with the quiet, humming precision of a high-performance engine. I walked into my home office, turned on my dual monitors, and bathed the dark room in the cool glow of raw data. I opened the encrypted folder on my desktop. The file labeled Receipts stared back at me. I clicked on the high-resolution photograph of the voided steakhouse check from 6 months ago. The $12,000 piece of paper that had nearly derailed my wedding reception. At the time, my mother claimed the funds were rerouted to purchase bespoke Italian suits and leather Oxfords for Tyler. It was a plausible lie, designed to make me feel small and insignificant. But liars often fail to realize the digital footprints they leave behind. In the financial sector, a routing number is a thread. If you pull it hard enough, the entire sweater unravels. I logged into a public records database utilizing the search parameters I employed daily to vet energy contractors. I traced the routing and account digits printed on the bottom of my father's voided check. I cross-referenced those numbers with the county clerk files looking for recent liens or property encumbrances linked to my parents. The results populated my screen in a matter of seconds. The truth was far more sinister than a simple shopping spree. My parents had not bounced my catering check to buy my brother clothes. They bounced it to keep him out of a federal penitentiary. I analyzed the Uniform Commercial Code filings registered under John and Diane's names. Over the past 2 years, they had taken out a series of predatory high-interest small business loans. They leveraged the equity of their pristine suburban home and my father's modest consulting firm. The dates of those loan disbursements aligned perfectly with the end of every fiscal quarter. I overlaid their loan distribution schedule with the pressure mapping algorithm I had run on Tyler's aerospace logistics division. The puzzle pieces locked together with a devastating metallic click. Tyler was stealing corporate capital to fund his luxury downtown loft and his sports car. He was hemorrhaging money. But corporate accounting requires quarterly audits. Every 3 months, Tyler faced a ledger review that would expose his embezzlement. To prevent the aerospace executives from discovering the missing funds, he panicked and called our parents. John and Diane responded by securing predatory cash loans, wiring the money directly into Tyler's corporate shell accounts to temporarily backfill the deficit, just before the auditors arrived. Once the quarterly review passed, Tyler would siphon the money back out to pay the loan interest, keeping the fraudulent cycle spinning. It was a desperate, high-stakes laundering operation. So why did the catering check bounce a month before my wedding? I looked at the corporate calendar for the aerospace firm. Tyler's executives had scheduled a surprise internal risk assessment that exact same week. He was caught off guard. He needed $12,000 to balance a specific transportation ledger immediately, and my parents had already exhausted their credit lines. They liquidated the money designated for my wedding food and wired it straight into Tyler's fraudulent account to cover his tracks. They did not just choose his promotion over my wedding. They chose to become active co-conspirators in a federal crime. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. The sheer gravity of their deception was staggering. They had weaponized my wedding day to finance corporate fraud. I highlighted the final data points, formatted the spreadsheets into clear, undeniable graphs, and pressed print. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life. I listened to the rhythmic mechanical sound of the pages sliding into the output tray. Each sheet of paper felt like a brick being laid in a wall they could never climb over. I gathered the warm, crisp documents and slid them into clear plastic protective sleeves. I placed the sleeves inside a thick black leather binder, snapping the heavy metal rings closed with a sharp, definitive crack. Documentation is the ultimate armor. Gaslighters rely on your faulty memory. Manipulators rely on your emotional instability. They count on you feeling too confused and too exhausted to challenge their narrative. But paper does not forget. Math does not yield to guilt trips. When you hold the physical proof in your hands, their lies dissolve into vapor. I left my office and walked into the bedroom to prepare for the meeting. The occasion required a very specific uniform. I bypassed the soft pastel dresses and the comfortable knit sweaters. I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a tailored slate gray power suit. The fabric was structured, the lines were sharp, and the silhouette projected unyielding authority. I buttoned the crisp white silk blouse and fastened the blazer. I pulled my hair back into a severe, polished twist at the nape of my neck. I opened my jewelry box and bypassed the delicate gold chains. I selected the vintage pearl earrings Grandma Ruby had given me. They were heavy classic and carried the weight of a matriarch who survived a lifetime of hard prairie winters. Ethan walked into the bedroom just as I was slipping on my pointed leather heels. He leaned against the doorframe, holding a mug of dark roast coffee, watching me armor up. He did not ask if I was nervous. He did not offer hollow reassurances that everything would magically work out. He understood exactly what I was about to do. He set his mug on the dresser, walked over, and placed his hands on my shoulders. His gaze was steady and fierce. He leaned down and pressed a firm kiss to my forehead. "You are bulletproof," he whispered. "Go burn it down." I picked up the heavy black binder, slid my phone into my pocket, and walked out the door. The drive to the Oak Ridge Country Club took 20 minutes. The sprawling estate sat nestled among rolling green hills and manicured fairways, a bastion of old Tulsa money and exclusionary privilege. The winding driveway was lined with towering oak trees, their thick branches casting dappled shadows over the imported luxury vehicles parked near the entrance. I handed my keys to a valet dressed in a crisp white uniform. I gripped the leather handle of my binder and walked up the wide stone steps. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, revealing an opulent lobby dripping with crystal chandeliers and the rich scent of expensive cigars and polished leather. A hostess greeted me at the reception desk, her smile practiced and hollow. "I'm here for the Aerospace Executive Luncheon," I stated. She nodded politely and guided me down a long, hushed corridor lined with vintage oil paintings. We stopped in front of a pair of closed oak doors featuring brass handles. The private dining room. I did not hesitate. I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The room was grand and stifling. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the center of the space, set with fine china crystal water goblets and heavy silver cutlery. The afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a bright glare across the table. Tyler sat near the head of the table. His bespoke Italian suit looked immaculate, but the subtle details betrayed his internal panic. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. He kept tapping his thumb against his water glass, the ice clinking a frantic, nervous rhythm. To his left sat 3 senior executives from the aerospace firm. They wore dark, conservative suits. Their expressions were grim, unreadable, and radiating severe corporate impatience. And then there were my parents. John and Diane sat directly across from the executives. My father leaned back in his plush leather chair, his posture sprawling and confident. My mother sat beside him, wearing a pristine navy dress, sipping sparkling water with an air of aristocratic boredom. When the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, every head in the room turned. My parents looked at me, and their faces shifted into identical expressions of profound smugness. They saw the black binder in my hand. They saw the tight line of my jaw. They interpreted my silence as submission. In their minds, the trap had worked perfectly. They believed their scapegoat daughter had spent the entire night crying over her keyboard, forging a clean risk assessment to save her golden brother. They expected me to walk up to that table, grovel before the executives, hand over a fake report, and vanish back into the shadows. My father offered a small, patronizing smile, gesturing toward the empty chair at the far end of the mahogany table. "Have a seat, Caroline," John said, his voice dripping with triumphant condescension. "The board is ready to review your corrected data." I looked at my father. I looked at the man who chose a networking mixer over walking me down the aisle. I looked at my brother, the parasite who drained my savings to buy his status. I did not sit down. I stood at the edge of the table, my slate gray suit blending into the severe shadows of the room. I placed the heavy black binder on the polished mahogany wood. The trap was indeed set. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who was holding the cage. I remained standing at the far end of the long mahogany table. The private dining room was suffocatingly quiet, insulated by thick velvet curtains and plush carpeting that absorbed every sound from the busy country club beyond those closed doors. The air smelled of expensive lemon polish and the faint metallic tang of old wealth. Tyler shifted in his leather seat. He tugged at the crisp collar of his bespoke shirt, a nervous gesture that betrayed the confident facade he was desperately attempting to project. He looked at the 3 senior executives sitting across from him, then glanced at me, his eyes narrowing with a silent command to obey. "Gentlemen." Tyler began, his voice taking on a practiced, smooth cadence. "I want to apologize for the unorthodox nature of this meeting. I know the preliminary risk assessment flagged several operational anomalies within my supply chain department. However, I invited my sister here today to clarify the origins of that highly irregular report." Tyler steepled his fingers, leaning forward over his pristine porcelain plate to project earnest sincerity. "The truth is, this entire situation stems from a deeply unfortunate family dispute. 6 months ago, my promotion gala coincided with Caroline's wedding. It was an unavoidable scheduling conflict caused by corporate demands. Since that day, she has harbored a severe personal grudge against me. The numbers in her audit were not generated through objective analysis. They were intentionally manipulated. She altered the variables to manufacture a crisis, attempting to sabotage my career out of sheer, petty jealousy. The 3 aerospace executives did not react. They sat perfectly still in their tailored suits, their expressions carved from granite. The lead executive, a stern man with sharp features and a slate gray tie, kept his cold gaze fixed evenly on Tyler. He did not nod in agreement. He did not take notes on the legal pad resting in front of him. He simply watched the performance unfold with the detached interest of a scientist observing a desperate laboratory rat. Sensing the frigid reception from the board, my father decided to intervene. John leaned forward, resting his thick forearms on the polished mahogany. He adopted the tone of a weary, heartbroken patriarch, attempting to leverage his age and perceived authority to sway the room. "It pains me to say this in a professional setting," John said, offering the executives a tight, sympathetic smile that did not reach his eyes. "But Tyler is telling the exact truth. Caroline has always struggled with her brother's success. Ever since they were children, she exhibited a bitter, competitive streak. We tried our best to manage it, but her behavior recently escalated into something entirely unstable. We brought her here so she could formally retract her fabricated claims and apologize to your board for wasting your valuable time." My mother, Diane, picked up her crystal water goblet. The ice chimed against the glass, a sharp, crystalline ring that echoed through the tense silence of the dining room. She took a delicate sip before setting the goblet down carefully on a linen coaster, ensuring her pristine posture remained flawless. "Caroline has a history of these irrational emotional outbursts," Diane added, her tone dripping with aristocratic pity. "She cannot separate her personal resentments from her professional duties. When we realized she was the lead auditor on Tyler's portfolio, we begged her to recuse herself for the sake of the firm. She refused. She saw an opportunity to inflict damage on her own blood, and she took it. We are simply here to assure you that Tyler's department is functioning flawlessly. This entire ordeal is nothing more than a vindictive fabrication created by an unwell young woman who needs serious help. I listened to the people who shared my DNA assassinate my character in a room full of strangers. I stood perfectly still at the edge of the table. I did not cross my arms defensively. I did not interrupt their monologues to scream my defense. I let their cruelty fill every single corner of the opulent space. I allowed them to weave a dense, inescapable web of lies on the official corporate record. They believed they were delivering a masterclass in manipulation. They thought their combined societal weight, their expensive clothes, and their polished deliveries would easily discredit a rogue data analyst. They assumed the executives would naturally side with a wealthy, established family over a silent, standing woman. They were tragically unaware of the secret I held close to my chest. At 6 o'clock that morning, while the Tulsa sky was still dark and the prairie wind howled outside my window, I had bypassed the standard vendor portals. I drafted a direct encrypted email to the chief executive officer of the aerospace logistics firm at their Chicago headquarters. I attached the unredacted forensic fraud report. I included the pressure mapping algorithms, the undeniable evidence of the phantom offshore accounts, and the exact timeline of the missing capital. I did not include a single word about family drama. I simply provided the raw, irrefutable math. The three stoic men sitting at the table were not low-level regional managers. They were elite corporate fixers dispatched directly by the CEO. They had spent their entire morning verifying my data with their own internal accounting software. They already knew Tyler was a thief. They already knew he had embezzled millions of dollars to fund his luxurious lifestyle. They did not fly to Oklahoma to support a junior vice president through a tough family dynamic. They flew here to terminate him. The executives were intentionally allowing Tyler, John, and Diane to speak freely. They were letting my family dig their own graves, silently documenting every single lie, every false assurance, and every desperate attempt to cover up a federal crime. The silence from the board was not hesitation or confusion. It was a highly calculated trap, and my parents were eagerly sprinting right into the jaws of it with smiles on their faces. Caroline Tyler prompted, his voice laced with a newfound arrogant confidence. He misinterpreted the executive's silence as agreement. He smirked, gesturing grandly toward the empty leather chair at my side. "Sit down. Tell the board you made a mistake. Give them the corrected files and we can put this ugly family business behind us." I looked at my brother. I studied the sharp, precise cut of his stolen suit. I observed the way my father puffed out his chest, radiating unearned triumph. I watched my mother trace the rim of her crystal glass, a deeply satisfied smirk resting on her painted lips. They were reveling in my perceived defeat. The urge to yell to defend my sanity, to scream about the empty aisle on my wedding day, was entirely absent. Anger is a hot, messy emotion reserved for people you still respect. Standing in that dining room, looking at the trio of individuals who had systematically tried to destroy my spirit for 29 years, I felt nothing but cold, clinical detachment. The psychological hold they once maintained over me had evaporated. The dining room fell silent again. The seconds ticked by, measured by the faint, rhythmic ticking of a brass grandfather clock located in the distant hallway. They waited for my submission. They waited for the scapegoat to bow her head, accept the blame, and present the fraudulent documents that would save their golden boy. I shifted my gaze away from my family. I looked directly into the eyes of the lead executive sitting across the table. He met my stare, a silent, profound acknowledgement passing between us. Two analytical professionals, recognizing the exact geometry of the execution block that had just been constructed. I did not offer an apology. I did not shed a single manufactured tear. I lifted my right hand and rested my palm flat against the cover of the thick black leather binder sitting on the table in front of me. With a swift, deliberate motion, I flipped the heavy cover open. The metal rings snapped inside, the sound cracking through the quiet room like a gunshot, making Tyler flinch in his seat. "Let us review the actual data," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, springing the trap wide open. I withdrew 3 thick packets of bound documents from the heavy enclosure. I did not toss them. I placed each packet precisely in front of the 3 aerospace executives sitting across the wide expanse of polished mahogany. I ignored my father. I bypassed my mother. I looked entirely past my brother. I spoke exclusively to the men possessing the authority to level the room. "Please turn to page 4, I instructed my voice, maintaining a steady clinical cadence. "You will find the raw financial inputs from the logistics division over the past 4 quarters. The lead executive opened his packet. The crisp sound of turning paper severed the stifling tension. I did not entertain their petty family drama. I spoke the universal language of mathematics. I directed their attention to the specialized pressure mapping models I had applied to Tyler's cash flow. I detailed how millions of dollars entered his departmental ledger only to vanish into undocumented channels before reaching the designated vendors. I highlighted the precise locations of the financial sinkholes. Tyler lunged forward in his plush leather chair. "Those models are completely fabricated," he shouted, a frantic pitch destroying his smooth corporate delivery. "She does not understand our supply chain overhead. She is guessing." The lead executive did not look up from the spreadsheet. "Be quiet," the man commanded. His tone was not loud, but it possessed a cold titanium density that instantly forced Tyler back into his seat. The executive traced his index finger down the column of missing capital, his jaw muscles clenching tight. I guided them to page 12. I presented the cross-referenced dates. I demonstrated how the vanishing corporate funds aligned flawlessly with the purchase of my brother's luxury downtown loft, his bespoke wardrobe, and his imported sports car. The numbers stripped away his golden boy armor, leaving nothing behind but a desperate common thief wearing an expensive, stolen suit. My father realized the magnitude of the presentation. John attempted a rescue mission, his chest puffing out as he slammed his hand against the table. "This is an outrageous violation of privacy," John bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You cannot bring unverified personal expenses into a professional boardroom. This is a simple accounting error that Tyler can easily rectify." I turned my gaze to the man who raised me. I felt a fleeting, profound sense of pity for his tragic ignorance. He genuinely believed his bluster could outmaneuver federal fraud statutes. "It is not an accounting error," I stated evenly. "And the theft does not end with your son." I reached back into my binder and pulled out a single sheet of glossy photographic paper. I slid it across the smooth wooden surface until it stopped directly in front of the lead executive. It was the high-resolution image of the voided $12,000 catering check from my wedding. The check my father had written. A month before my wedding, Tyler faced a surprise internal risk assessment. I explained, keeping my delivery utterly devoid of emotion. He was caught off guard. He needed $12,000 to balance a specific transportation ledger immediately, Otherwise, your internal auditors would discover his embezzlement. He panicked and called his parents. I instructed the board to flip to the final section of the packet. I displayed the Uniform Commercial Code filings and the county clerk records I had unearthed that morning. I presented the undeniable proof of the predatory high-interest business loans secured by John and Diane. My parents did not have the liquid capital to save him. I continued the words, dropping like heavy stones into the silent room. They had already mortgaged their suburban home and my father's consulting firm to cover Tyler's previous quarterly deficits. They were actively laundering personal loans into his corporate shell accounts to temporarily backfill the missing capital before every scheduled review. Once the audits passed, Tyler siphoned the money back out to pay their loan interest. The executive stared at the documents, the sheer scale of the external laundering conspiracy slowly dawning on them. Their faces turned pale with a mixture of shock and radiating fury. But this surprise assessment threw off their timeline, I noted, gesturing toward the voided check on the table. My parents had exhausted their credit lines. To keep Tyler out of a federal penitentiary, they liquidated the funds designated for my wedding reception. They wired the catering money straight into the logistics department accounts. That is why the check bounced. They are active accomplices in this operation. John's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The booming patriarch was suddenly paralyzed, the color draining from his cheeks until he resembled a faded wax figure. He realized I had just handed the aerospace firm the exact financial thread needed to seize his house, his business, and his freedom. I had one final piece of evidence to deliver. I extracted a printed screenshot of my mother's text message. The message she sent me while I stood alone in the church vestibule. I slid the paper across the mahogany table toward the executives. My family did not miss my wedding due to a corporate scheduling conflict, I clarified, pointing to the printed words. They missed it because Tyler was unraveling. The promotion gala was a desperate attempt to project investor confidence while they scrambled to cover up the missing funds. As you can see by my mother's own admission, covering up his fraud was their top priority. The lead executive read the text message. His promotion party is more important. The man looked up, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He stared at Tyler, then shifted his lethal glare toward John and Diane. The golden facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Tyler began to stammer, his hands shaking violently as he tried to gather the scattered documents in front of him. He babbled incoherent excuses, his charming vocabulary devolving into a pathetic whimper. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had just snapped shut on his leg. The aristocratic composure of my mother disintegrated. Diane shattered. The pristine navy dress suddenly looked absurd on a woman facing imminent financial ruin. She burst into loud, frantic sobs, the sound echoing harshly off the crystal chandeliers. She reached her manicured hands across the table, her fingers grasping uselessly at the empty air. "Caroline, please!" Diane wept, her voice high and ragged. "You cannot do this to us! We are your family! Please take it back! Tell them you made a mistake! We will lose everything! We will lose the house! Please help us!" I stood tall at the edge of the mahogany table. I looked down at the opulent spread of food sitting before my parents. A waiter had delivered expensive plated steaks just before I entered the room. The prime cuts of meat rested untouched on the fine porcelain swimming in rich, savory glazes. It was a perfect, poetic mirror of the wedding meal they had proudly promised to provide, only to violently rip away when their golden boy needed a bailout. They were sitting in a luxury country club, demanding a feast they could no longer afford to purchase. I looked into my mother's tear-streaked face. I saw the desperate terror swimming in her eyes. I saw a woman who had spent 29 years systematically dismantling my self-worth, finally realizing she had handed me the exact tools required to dismantle her entire life. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt the profound, magnificent weight of justice balancing the scales. "I would help you," I said, maintaining absolute, unbroken eye contact with the woman who gave birth to me. "But my life is more important." Diane recoiled as if I had struck her across the face with a physical blow. She collapsed back into her plush leather chair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with uncontrollable sobs. My father remained frozen, staring blankly at the voided check, his mind unable to process the total annihilation of his legacy. The lead executive closed the forensic packet. He did not ask any clarifying questions. He did not need to deliberate. He turned his cold gaze toward my brother. "Tyler, you are suspended immediately, without pay, pending a full federal prosecution," the executive announced, his voice slicing through my mother's weeping. "Do not return to the office. Do not attempt to access the corporate servers. Our legal department will be contacting the authorities to initiate a grand jury investigation into your shell accounts. Furthermore, we will be pursuing civil litigation against your parents for their active participation in laundering company capital." The executive reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone, pressing a button to summon the country club security team. My work here was finished. I gathered my empty black leather binder and tucked it securely under my arm. I did not offer a farewell. I turned my back on the weeping, broken remnants of the Bennett family. I walked toward the heavy oak doors, pushed them open, and stepped out into the quiet luxury of the hushed corridor. I walked down the long hall lined with vintage oil paintings. The sharp, rhythmic click of my pointed leather heels echoed against the polished marble floor. With every single step, the heavy, suffocating burden of the past 30 years fell away, dissolving into the warm Oklahoma afternoon. I walked out the front doors of the country club, handed my ticket to the valet, and breathed in the fresh prairie air. I was completely, unequivocally free. 4 weeks passed since the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room closed behind me. The transition from the mild Oklahoma spring into the blazing heat of summer mirrored the rapid evaporation of my family's fabricated empire. When a corporate structure detects a financial infection, the amputation is swift and entirely merciless. I spent my days analyzing subterranean data in an air-conditioned high-rise, watching from a safe clinical distance as the consequences of their deception systematically dismantled their lives. The most reliable source of information regarding their downfall did not come from federal indictments or local news bulletins. It came through my cell phone on a lazy Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on my back porch enjoying a glass of iced tea when Grandma Ruby called. I answered the phone, immediately greeted by the comforting, rhythmic sound of a wooden spoon scraping against a ceramic mixing bowl. "I am making a peach cobbler," Ruby announced, her voice a gravelly, warm rasp through the speaker. "The peaches at the farmer's market were perfect today. I thought you might want an update on the local gossip while I crimp this pie crust." I smiled, pulling my knees up to my chest. "I would love to hear the local weather report, Grandma." Ruby chuckled a dry, knowing sound. "The forecast is severe thunderstorms for the Bennett household," she noted. "The aerospace firm did not just terminate your brother. They handed his entire portfolio over to a forensic accounting team and filed a formal complaint with the federal authorities. They froze his corporate accounts immediately." I listened as she detailed the swift, brutal domino effect of financial ruin. Because John and Diane had utilized the equity of their small consulting firm and their pristine suburban property to secure those predatory loans, the banks panicked the moment the fraud investigation leaked. Financial institutions abhor uncertainty. They enacted the acceleration clauses hidden deep within the loan contracts, demanding immediate repayment of the principal balances. My parents possessed zero liquid capital. They had spent every available cent covering up the embezzlement. The bank initiated formal foreclosure proceedings on Wednesday. Ruby continued the sound of a rolling pin pressing into dough echoing through the receiver. They repossessed Tyler's imported sports car right out of his reserved parking spot downtown. The building manager at his luxury loft evicted him following 3 missed rent payments. Your mother tried to host a brunch at the country club to save face, pretending everything was a simple misunderstanding. The membership director intercepted her at the front lobby and quietly informed her that their accounts were suspended indefinitely. The image of Diane dressed in her designer clothes being turned away from her precious social sanctuary brought a profound sense of closure. Her entire identity was wrapped in projecting an illusion of wealth. Without that country club membership, she was invisible to the Tulsa elite. "And Tyler?" I asked, watching a hawk circle high above the prairie grass in my backyard. Ruby paused her baking. "That boy is finally learning the true value of $1, she said, a hint of steel entering her tone. The reality of Tyler's situation was a masterclass in poetic justice. He was completely blacklisted from the corporate logistics sector. No reputable firm in the state would touch a junior executive currently under investigation for federal embezzlement. His bespoke Italian suits and polished communication degree were entirely useless. However, criminal defense attorneys require massive cash retainers, and the bank had seized his assets. He desperately needed a paycheck that did not require a background check. He was forced to seek employment in the only industry in Oklahoma that hired uncredentialed men for immediate physical labor: the oil fields. Ethan came home a few days prior, shaking his head with a bewildered smile. His closest friend, a rugged veteran site manager named Caleb, ran a demanding drilling operation on a patch of unforgiving clay just outside the city limits. Caleb needed entry-level mudloggers. Mudlogging is arguably the most grueling, filthy, and exhausting position on an oil rig. It involves standing in the blistering heat, covered in toxic chemical lubricants and crude oil, manually analyzing the heavy sludge that pumps out of the subterranean drill pipes. Tyler applied for the job. Caleb, fully aware of exactly who Tyler was and what he had done to my wedding, hired him on the spot. My golden brother, a man who once threw a tantrum because his caterer used the wrong shade of white linen, was now wearing heavy steel-toed boots and flame-retardant coveralls. He spent 12 hours a day wrestling heavy iron pipes and shoveling thick, toxic mud beneath the scorching sun. He had to answer directly to Caleb, a man who harbored zero tolerance for charming excuses or corporate jargon. If Tyler complained about his blisters or attempted to shirk his physical duties, Caleb simply handed him a heavier shovel. The universe possesses a remarkable sense of humor when you finally step back and allow it to balance the scales. But desperate individuals rarely accept their fate with quiet dignity. When a parasitic organism loses its primary host, it scrambles to find a new source of nourishment. My father was no exception. The following Tuesday, I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a complex supply chain matrix for a new energy client. The city of Tulsa stretched out beyond my floor-to-ceiling windows, baking under the midday heat. The intercom on my polished mahogany desk buzzed with a sharp, persistent tone. I pressed the silver button. "Yes." Miss Bennett, the receptionist, began, her voice carrying a note of polite hesitation. "There is a man in the downstairs lobby demanding to see you. He claims to be your father. He does not have a scheduled appointment, and he is becoming quite agitated with the security desk." I released the intercom button and turned my attention to the secondary monitor on my desk. As a senior director, I possessed access to the internal building security feeds. I clicked on the camera designated for the main lobby. The high-definition video feed filled my screen. I saw John Bennett pacing the expansive marble floor of the ground-level reception area. He looked entirely unrecognizable. The booming, confident patriarch who used to silence rooms with a single glare was gone. His tailored suit hung loosely on a frame that seemed to have shrunken over the past 4 weeks. His tie was pulled askew, and he kept wiping a frantic hand across his sweating forehead. He was arguing wildly with a stoic security guard pointing a trembling finger toward the elevators. He had driven to my corporate headquarters to beg. He wanted a bailout. He wanted the daughter he had discarded to empty her savings and rescue his consulting firm from the bank's foreclosure department. He assumed that because we shared a biological tie, I would eventually fold upon seeing his pathetic state. I sat in my ergonomic chair watching the silent video feed. I studied the frantic movements of the man pacing the marble tiles. I searched my chest for a flicker of sympathy, a sudden urge to rush downstairs and offer him a lifeline. I found absolutely nothing. The reservoir of daughterly devotion had been drained dry, replaced by a solid, impenetrable wall of clinical detachment. Is it cruel to let people experience the unmitigated consequences of their own actions? When you watch someone who actively tried to destroy your life finally face the destruction of their own making, does walking away make you a monster? Or is it simply the ultimate manifestation of self-respect? Boundaries are not merely suggestions. They are the structural pillars that keep your house from collapsing when toxic weather rolls in. If I went down to that lobby and handed him a check, I would be inviting the infection right back into my bloodstream. I would be proving that his manipulative tactics still held power over me. I reached out and pressed the silver intercom button once more. Please inform security that I do not have a father. I instructed the receptionist, my voice, calm level, and entirely devoid of hesitation. Instruct them to escort the gentleman off the premises immediately. If he refuses to leave, authorize them to involve local law enforcement. I released the button. I watched the security feed closely. 2 uniformed guards approached John. They flanked him on either side, their postures rigid and uncompromising. My father stopped pacing. He looked up toward the ceiling cameras, his face twisting into a mask of desperate disbelief. He argued for a few more seconds, his arms flailing, but the guards simply stepped closer, directing him toward the heavy revolving glass doors. He slumped his shoulders, defeated by a barrier he could not charm or intimidate his way through. I watched him stumble out into the blinding summer heat, disappearing into the crowded downtown pedestrian traffic. I closed the security application on my monitor and returned to my supply chain matrix. I did not look back. But cutting off the patriarch was only half the battle. John relied on bluster and intimidation tactics that were easily neutralized by physical security. My mother operated on an entirely different frequency. Diane utilized emotional manipulation, passive-aggressive guilt, and the weaponization of maternal obligation. If the frontal assault failed, she would attempt a covert operation. The silence that followed my father's eviction from my office lobby was brief. Deep within her cramped new reality, my mother was already drafting a new strategy, preparing to launch a desperate, calculated campaign to crawl back into my good graces. She was about to realize that the daughter she once easily manipulated no longer existed, setting the stage for a final, definitive confrontation. 6 months dissolved into the golden hues of an Oklahoma autumn. The blistering summer heat retreated, leaving behind crisp mornings and a fierce, biting wind that rolled across the prairie. Time is a remarkable filter. It separates the vital from the superfluous. For me, those 6 months brought an era of profound, undisturbed tranquility. I settled into my new home with Ethan, a beautiful property bordered by acres of tall, rustling wheat. I thrived at my firm, directing analytics with a clear, unburdened mind. Meanwhile, the universe continued extracting its toll on the other side of the city. Tyler was enduring the harsh reality of the oil patches. Winter on a drilling rig is an unforgiving experience. I heard through Ethan's connections that my brother spent his days shivering in flame-retardant overalls, covered head to toe in freezing, toxic sludge. The golden boy, who once demanded bespoke Italian tailoring, now scrubbed crude oil out from under his fingernails using abrasive pumice soap in a shared, rusted shower trailer. His charm held zero currency among the hardened crewmen. John and Diane faced their own bleak descent. The bank finalized the foreclosure on their pristine suburban estate. Stripped of their equity and their social standing, they relocated to a cramped two-bedroom apartment situated near a noisy interstate highway. There were no more crystal goblets, no more aged scotch, and no more country club invitations. They became ordinary, struggling citizens facing the exact financial ruin they tried to force upon me. When a parasite exhausts one host, it invariably searches for another. My father attempted a direct assault and failed. My mother, true to her nature, opted for a covert emotional siege. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I sat on my wide wooden porch, wrapped in a thick woven blanket. The air carried the sharp scent of cedar and impending rain. Out in the sprawling yard, Ethan threw a worn tennis ball for our newly adopted rescue dog, a lanky hound mix with boundless, joyful energy. I watched them race through the tall grass, my chest warming with a quiet gratitude. The mail carrier had driven by an hour earlier. A stack of letters rested on the small table beside my chair. I sifted through the utility bills and catalog advertisements until my fingers brushed against a thick, textured envelope. The return address was missing, but I instantly recognized the elegant, looping cursive ink on the front. Diane. My pulse did not quicken. My breath remained steady. A year ago, receiving a handwritten note from my mother would have triggered a cascade of anxiety. I would have agonized over the contents before tearing the seal. Today, I simply picked up a silver letter opener, sliced the top edge, and unfolded the heavy parchment. The letter spanned 3 pages. I read her words with the clinical detachment of an auditor reviewing a flawed prospectus. Diane did not offer a genuine apology. She offered a masterclass in passive voice manipulation and deflected accountability. She wrote long, meandering paragraphs about how difficult the past 2 years had been for the family. Mistakes were made, she penned her elegant handwriting, failing to mask the cowardice of the phrasing. We were operating under immense, unbearable pressure, Caroline. Misunderstandings occurred on all sides. Your father and I did not realize how much our actions hurt you. We were just trying to hold everything together. I traced my finger over the ink. Misunderstandings occurred. Mistakes were made. She refused to use the pronoun I. She refused to write the words, "We stole from you," or "We abandoned you." In her crafted narrative, the betrayal was merely a vague, unfortunate weather event that happened to rain on my wedding day. She dedicated the final page to a desperate, cloying plea for reconciliation. She waxed poetic about the unbreakable bonds of blood. "Tyler is gone," she wrote, the ink smudging slightly, perhaps from a staged, deliberate tear. "We barely speak to him now. We are so lonely in this awful little apartment. We miss our daughter. It is time to put the past behind us and be a family again. Please let us come home." I lowered the letter, looking out over the yard. Ethan was laughing, wrestling the muddy tennis ball from the hound. The contrast between my vibrant, authentic reality and the hollow, pathetic desperation on those 3 pages was staggering. Diane did not miss me. She missed my earning potential. She missed having a reliable, obedient scapegoat to absorb her anxiety and fund her lifestyle. Now that Tyler was disgraced and their cash cow was slaughtered, they needed a new savior to rescue them from the squalor of their own choices. I felt no anger. Anger implies a lingering emotional investment. I felt only a vast, empty indifference. The woman who wrote this letter was a stranger. I stood up, walked into my home office, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pulled out a thick manila folder. I picked up a black marker and crossed out the word receipts. Underneath, I wrote a new title in bold block letters: The Past. I dropped Diane's 3-page manipulation into the folder and closed the drawer. I did not need the evidence anymore. The trial was over. I grabbed a blank piece of stationery from my desk and a pen. I did not draft a multi-page rebuttal. I did not list her crimes or demand an explanation she was incapable of giving. Gaslighters thrive on engagement. They feed on your explanations, twisting your words to keep you trapped in their chaotic cycle. The only way to win their game is to refuse to step onto the board. I wrote exactly 2 sentences. I forgive you for my own peace. Do not contact me again. I folded the paper, sealed it in a standard envelope, and wrote down her new apartment address. I walked out to the roadside mailbox, placed the letter inside, and raised the red metal flag. I turned my back on the road and walked up the gravel driveway. Ethan met me halfway, his hands tucked into his pockets, the hound trotting happily at his heels. He looked at the mailbox, then looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I took his arm, leaning into his solid, comforting warmth. It is finished, I told him. He smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. Good, because we have a party to get ready for. The following weekend marked my 30th birthday. Decades of societal conditioning teach women to dread leaving their 20s behind, but I welcomed the milestone with open arms. Surviving my 20s felt like surviving a prolonged bruising storm. 30 felt like standing in the clear, radiant aftermath. Ethan refused to let the occasion pass without a grand celebration. He knew the deep, lingering shadow my parents had cast over my wedding reception. He wanted to overwrite that painful memory with an evening of pure, unadulterated joy. He rented out a beautiful historic pavilion located near the edge of a pristine, sparkling lake. He strung hundreds of warm, amber fairy lights across the wooden rafters. He hired a local folk band that played upbeat, foot-stomping melodies that echoed across the water. When I arrived, the pavilion was packed. It was not filled with wealthy corporate executives or country club socialites. It was filled with my chosen family. Ethan's parents drove up from Texas bringing a grand homemade chocolate cake. My colleagues from the analytics firm were there, laughing and sharing stories. Caleb, the rugged site manager who now held Tyler's fate in his calloused hands, stood by the grill, flipping burgers and swapping jokes. And sitting in the center of it all, holding court from a comfortable wicker chair, was Grandma Ruby. She wore a bright crimson cardigan, her eyes sparkling with fierce, proud joy as she watched me walk into the light. I spent the entire evening surrounded by genuine, unconditional affection. I danced until my feet ached. I laughed until my ribs felt bruised. There were no empty pews. There were no missing seats. Every single person in that pavilion chose to be there, not out of obligation, but out of love. As midnight approached, the band played a slow acoustic ballad. Ethan pulled me close, swaying gently to the rhythm. The amber lights reflected in his eyes. He spun me around and I caught a glimpse of Grandma Ruby raising her glass of sweet tea in a silent, triumphant toast. The bitter, hollow memory of the church aisle finally dissolved, replaced entirely by the warmth of the people holding me right now. I realized the ultimate victory over a toxic family is not vengeance. It is not watching them lose their money or their status. The ultimate victory is looking around your life and realizing you do not need them anymore. I closed my eyes, resting my cheek against my husband's shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar and lake water. The Bennett family curse was broken. I had drawn the boundary and I had survived the fallout. Now there was only one final chapter left to write. A chapter focused entirely on the future, bringing an unexpected, brilliant light into the space my parents left behind. The passage of time is the greatest equalizer. 2 years after I slid that heavy black binder across the mahogany country club table, my life expanded in directions I never previously thought possible. I was no longer just a senior director auditing supply chains. My firm promoted me to vice president of data analytics. I now oversaw entire logistical grids for the energy sector across the Great Plains. I walked into executive boardrooms not as an intimidated young woman seeking approval, but as an authority holding undeniable math. I built a reputation on precision integrity and a steadfast refusal to compromise my standards for anyone. The executives who once listened to my father attempt to humiliate me now sought my counsel on multi-million-dollar acquisitions. The professional respect I commanded was a direct result of shedding the dead weight of my past. Our home on the edge of the prairie evolved into a vibrant sanctuary. We converted the detached garage into a spacious, sunlit guest house. We did not rent the space out to strangers. We handed the keys directly to Grandma Ruby. She sold her old property and moved in, bringing her vintage rocking chairs, her cast-iron skillets, and her fierce, unwavering spirit. Every morning, I woke up to the smell of her brewing chicory coffee and baking fresh biscuits. She spent her afternoons sitting on the wraparound porch, throwing a worn tennis ball for our rescue hound, watching the Oklahoma wind ripple through the tall wheat fields. Providing her with a safe, luxurious, and deeply loved environment was the greatest return on investment I could ever imagine. She was the only person from my bloodline who stood by me, and now she would never spend a single day alone. Her presence anchored our property in profound generational wisdom. On a bright Sunday afternoon, I stood in the center of a spare bedroom located at the end of our main hallway. I wore a pair of paint-splattered denim overalls, holding a wooden roller soaked in a soft, warm shade of sage green. The sunlight streamed through the open window, carrying the sweet scent of impending rain and damp earth. I rolled the color onto the drywall, applying steady, even strokes. The rhythmic motion felt deeply therapeutic. Ethan walked into the room holding 2 tall glasses of iced lemonade. He set the cold drinks on the wooden windowsill and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, looking quietly at the newly painted walls. I leaned back against his solid chest, placing my hand over my stomach. The curve was small, barely noticeable under the thick denim fabric, but the life growing inside me was a profound, miraculous reality. We were expecting our first child. A daughter. When I first discovered I was pregnant, a brief, fleeting moment of terror washed over me. I carried the Bennett DNA. I feared passing down the generational rot, the severe coldness, the conditional affection that defined my own childhood. But as Ethan held me on the bathroom floor, wiping tears of overwhelming relief from my cheeks, I realized the curse stopped with me. I was the firewall. This little girl would never know the sting of an empty church aisle. She would never have to earn her right to exist by funding someone else's fragile ego. She would be valued entirely for who she was, not for what she could provide to a toxic hierarchy. We were going to raise her in a home overflowing with authentic, unmerited grace. I walked over to a small wooden table resting in the corner of the nursery. A delicate, custom glass frame lay flat on the surface. Inside the transparent glass, resting on a background of crisp white linen, were the pressed, dried remnants of my wedding bouquet. The Oklahoma Indian blankets. Their crimson and gold petals had faded slightly over the past 2 years, but their resilient beauty remained firmly intact. I carefully lifted the frame and hung it on the freshly painted sage green wall. It served as a silent, powerful reminder that beautiful things can survive and even thrive in the most severe droughts. The flowers bloomed despite the harsh conditions, just like I did. I stepped back, admiring the room we had prepared. The space was filled with light warmth and an overwhelming sense of profound security. I realized my journey was truly finished. The scared 29-year-old bride standing alone in a dark church vestibule was gone. If you are listening to my story right now, and you find yourself sitting at an empty table waiting for a phone call that never comes, or crying over parents who refuse to see your intrinsic worth, I want to speak directly to you. I want to share the 3 core rules of survival that pulled me out of the darkness and into this beautiful sunlit reality. Listen closely, because these principles will save your life. Rule number 1. Blood is merely a biological fact. Family is a behavioral choice. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep your toxic relatives warm. You do not owe your loyalty to people who treat you like a disposable resource. Family consists of the individuals who show up for you, who protect your peace, and who celebrate your victories without a hidden agenda. You possess the inherent right to build your own family from scratch. Surround yourself with people who hand you keys to unlock your potential, just like Grandma Ruby did for me. Rule number 2. Documentation is the greatest shield against psychological manipulation. When you deal with narcissists and gaslighters, they will proactively attempt to distort your reality. They will claim they never said those hurtful words. They will insist you are overreacting. They will spin intricate webs of deception to make you feel entirely insane. Save the text messages, take the screenshots, keep the financial receipts. Build your own secure folder of truth. When you hold the tangible, physical proof of their abuse in your hands, their lies evaporate into thin air. The truth is a dense armor they cannot pierce. Rule number 3. Walking away from a one-sided relationship is not a failure. It is a vital rescue mission. Society conditions us to believe that cutting off our parents or siblings is a tragic, shameful defeat. We are taught to endure endless disrespect under the guise of familial duty. But leaving a toxic environment is the bravest, most triumphant action you can possibly take. It is the defining moment you finally decide to rescue yourself. You are allowed to pack your bags, walk out the front door, and never look back. Your departure is not a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate declaration of your own value. My name is Caroline Bennett. I am a vice president of data analytics, a devoted wife, a soon-to-be mother, and a woman who chose her own peace over a generational illusion. My parents skipped my wedding for a corporate promotion party, and it was the greatest gift they ever inadvertently gave me. The empty aisle was not a punishment. It was a perfectly clear runway. I took off, and I left them standing in the dust of their own destruction. Please remember that your value is not determined by the people who are incapable of loving you. You are worthy of a love that does not demand you shrink yourself to fit inside it. Stand up from that empty table. Walk out of that room. Build a beautiful, resilient life that your abusers do not get to touch. Drop a boundaries in the comments if you have ever had to choose your own peace over a toxic relationship. Take care of yourself. You earned it. There is a deeply ingrained myth in the fabric of traditional American culture, a quiet promise woven into the tapestry of suburban subdivisions, Sunday dinners, and holiday greeting cards. We are taught from the moment we can comprehend language that family is our absolute baseline. It is supposed to be the safety net that catches us when the world fractures, the harbor that offers refuge from the sudden, violent storms of life. But what happens when the harbor itself is the hurricane? What happens when the people entrusted with shaping your moral compass are the ones spinning the needle wildly off course? Caroline's story is not merely a gripping drama about a ruined wedding or a corporate embezzlement scandal. At its core, it is a devastating, crystal-clear mirror held up to modern parenting values. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable, often tragic reality of what occurs when parents prioritize the illusion of success over the grueling, unglamorous work of raising children with honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness. In the pursuit of the American dream, the metric for successful parenting has slowly become warped. We measure our child-rearing victories by bumper stickers, boasting of honor rolls, Ivy League acceptance letters, and rapid corporate promotions. We curate our lives for the neighborhood and the country club, treating our children as living, breathing extensions of our own resumes. When John and Diane Bennett chose a downtown aerospace gala over their daughter's wedding, they weren't just making a scheduling decision. They were worshiping at the altar of perceived status. They prioritized the aesthetic of success over the substance of love. This is the danger of a traditional family structure when it is hollowed out by superficiality. When the image of the family becomes more important than the individuals within it, honesty is the very first casualty. Parents begin lying to their friends, then to their children, and eventually to themselves. They begin laundering money to cover a son's embezzlement, simply because the shame of an imperfect, failing child is too heavy for their brittle egos to bear. John and Diane fell into the most perilous trap of family dynamics, the creation of the golden child. By constantly insulating Tyler from his own failures, taking credit from Caroline's middle school agricultural project to artificially inflate his intellect, and later securing predatory loans to cover his corporate fraud, they believed they were demonstrating supreme parental loyalty. They thought they were protecting him. Instead, they were methodically destroying him. True family responsibility does not mean serving as a permanent buffer between your child and the consequences of their actions. When parents continually alter reality to spare a child from discomfort, they are not offering love. They are constructing a prison of lifelong incompetence. Tyler's eventual downfall, sweating in toxic mud on an oil rig stripped of his bespoke Italian suits and his unearned title, was not a tragedy enacted by a vengeful sister. It was the inevitable collapse of a man who was never taught how to stand on his own 2 feet. His parents robbed him of the opportunity to develop true character, replacing it with a hollow, fragile ego that shattered the moment it met the unyielding gravity of the real world. Conversely, Caroline's experience illuminates the dark, often unspoken shadow of the golden child dynamic, the scapegoat. In families that lack emotional awareness, the reliable, self-sufficient child is rarely celebrated. Instead, they are commodified. Caroline was not viewed as a daughter to be nurtured. She was a utility to be mined. Her intellect, her savings, and even the sacredness of her wedding day were treated as raw materials to be harvested to build Tyler's pedestal. This dynamic thrives in environments where fairness is viewed as an inconvenience rather than a foundational parenting value. Fairness in a family does not mean identical treatment, but it strictly requires that no child is ever asked to set themselves on fire to keep another family member warm. When parents demand that one child absorb the financial and emotional deficits of another, they send a chilling, unequivocal message. Your value to this family is entirely conditional. It is a failure of emotional awareness that echoes through thousands of American homes today, where the quiet, obedient children are bleeding out while their parents applaud the loudest, most destructive sibling. If these themes resonate with the quiet fractures in your own history, if you have ever found yourself standing alone at the altar of your own life while the people who should have celebrated you looked the other way, know that you are not walking this path in isolation. Healing begins when we bring these shadows into the light, when we realize that our stories are shared. If you find value and comfort in these reflections, I encourage you to subscribe to Jessica Told Stories. Here, we will continue to explore the raw, unfiltered realities of family dynamics, resilience, and the immense courage it takes to rewrite your own ending. The lesson we must extract from the Bennett family's collapse is a radical redefinition of parental guidance. Long-term guidance does not mean ensuring your child wins at all costs. It means raising an adult who knows how to lose with dignity, how to tell the truth when it threatens their comfort, and how to respect the boundaries of others. Honesty in parenting requires the immense courage to look at your child and say, "You failed, and I will sit with you in this failure, but I will not fix it for you." It requires the emotional intelligence to recognize that a daughter's modest, hard-won joy is infinitely more valuable than a son's glittering, fraudulent empire. We are socially conditioned to believe that blood is thicker than water, a phrase that has been weaponized for generations to demand infinite forgiveness and endless sacrifice. The holidays, societal expectations, and the whispered judgments of extended relatives all conspire to keep the scapegoat tethered to the post. We are told that a traditional family must stay together at all costs, preserving the unit, even if that unit is actively poisoning its members. But here is the unconventional truth, the decisive philosophy that Caroline's journey forces us to acknowledge. The highest form of love you can offer a destructive family is to let them fall. Society insists that walking away from your parents is the ultimate act of betrayal, a moral failure that marks you as cold and ungrateful. Yet what if the exact opposite is true? What if the most profound act of familial responsibility is refusing to participate in the sickness? By severing the financial and emotional lifelines, Caroline did not destroy her family. She simply stopped paying the ransom for their illusions. She allowed gravity to do its natural, necessary work. Sometimes the most vital lesson a parent will ever teach a child is inadvertently taught through their own failures. And sometimes the most honorable way a child can respect their family lineage is by bravely choosing to end it, stepping out of the toxic legacy to plant a new, healthy root in different soil. As you look at your own life, at the empty chairs at your table, or the heavy expectations placed upon your shoulders, ask yourself, are you preserving a relationship, or are you just preserving an illusion? The answer might terrify you. But the truth, no matter how isolating it feels in the moment, is the only foundation that will not eventually sink back into the earth. Freedom rarely looks like a warm embrace. Often it looks like a locked door, a changed lock, and the quiet, terrifying thrill of finally walking away.